Have you ever seen someone share something and thought, that looks familiar? Or have you had your own work copied? The online business world is built on the phenomenon of just being one step ahead and the concept of robbing and duplicating. In this episode, we're diving into the predatory culture of plagiarized content. Let's do it. Welcome to Duped, a limited series podcast which explores the dark side of online business. If you've ever felt like you've been duped by a celebrity entrepreneur or coach, or watched with wonderment while people do downright dirty things to grow their business, this is the show for you. I'm Dr. Michelle Mazur.
And I'm Maggie Patterson, and we're two seasoned communications pros. And we've got a lot of questions about the practices, strategies, and tactics that are all too common in online business. In Duped, we're going to unpack all of it with a focus on why it's happening, what we need to know about it, and more importantly, what each of us can do about it. Let's do it. So before we dive into this episode, I will fully just give everyone to the... We are going to be talking about some touchy subject matter. Some of you might feel a little triggered. And our purpose in this episode is not to make anyone feel shame. It is to make us all do better, because the way we've been conditioned in this market is seriously messed up. Michelle, agree?
Oh, 100% agree with that.
Because I will fully admit to my first draft of the script was pretty harsh. So Michelle talked me off the ledge.
I certainly did. I was reading it and I was like, ooh, I think we need to be a little bit more neutral.
Yeah, I might have been a little fired up, just a wee bit. So let's dive into this episode. This is a really important topic. And for many of us, running an online business means we're constantly creating content, from blog posts to podcast episodes to Instagram content to the actual frameworks and methods we use with our clients. Content is really and truly the foundation. It's the backbone of our business. It's how we find clients, it's how we make sales, and it's how we serve our clients. Which is why we wanted to take a look at plagiarism, especially as Michelle has firsthand experience dealing with it in an academic setting. So we have like an in-house expert. We're not just making this up or plagiarizing this episode.
No, I mean, plagiarism. So I just want to state unequivocally that plagiarism sucks. It sucks to the person who's plagiarized. It sucks for the person who caught the person plagiarizing. It sucks to the person who was caught. And when I was a professor, I taught writing intensive classes. And that means we always covered plagiarism and what it is. And I just remember one semester, and this is the most extreme case of plagiarism I encountered. I had a student, he's super smart, like just smart as a whip, graduate school bound. He was amazing. And he turned in his final paper for this writing intensive class. And I was reading it and I'm like, some of this sounds familiar. And lo and behold, he just directly lifted paragraphs from some of the research studies we read that semester. And I walked down the hall and went to one of my friends, a fellow professor, and was like, oh, check this out. And so she's looking at the paper and she's like, wait a minute. He turned this exact paper into my class.
Whoa.
Oh yeah. Oh, but it gets better. And then we went to the department head, because now we have a big problem, like more than I can handle. And our department head looks at the paper. He's like, he turned this paper in for my class too. So he turned in a plagiarized paper for 3 different classes, which means we had to go to disciplinary action. And it was a choice of we could have had him kicked out of school, just permanently kicked out, records expunged, none of it counted. But we decided we would just suspend him for a semester he bit off more than he could chew. He took 3 writing intensive classes. The university says you shouldn't take more than 2. It's a lot of work. So I can see how he got pressed for time, and still it's not okay to plagiarize.
Yeah. And this is why in this episode, we are going to dive into understanding how this shows up why the culture of online business is really built on plagiarized ideas and how this is super, super messed up, because we are going to share some examples later on. And like, this is not something that just happens in online business. It happens in all creative industries. It happens in business. But before we dive into that, we want to talk about like, what is plagiarism? Because it's been a while. It's been a hot minute since we've all been in high school or in university. So before we unpack those problems and solutions, we want to talk about how this type of copycatting right through to plagiarism can show up, because it's often viewed as the example of what Michelle said, like this direct plagiarism where we full on copy someone's work. But Michelle, as you and I have talked about, that's just really one kind of plagiarism.
Yes, there are several different kinds. There's what you talked about as mosaic plagiarism. I taught it as patchwork plagiarism, where we're borrowing phrases from a source without using quotation marks or finding synonyms for the author's language while keeping the same general structure and meaning of the original. So really, we're just kind of patching it together using pretty much the author's words without using quotation marks or citations.
Good times.
I know. And then there is accidental plagiarism, which I think is one of the biggest things we see in the online business world. And accidental plagiarism is when a person neglects to cite their sources or misquotes their sources or unintentionally paraphrases a source. And I think the music industry is one of the best examples of accidental plagiarism. It happens all the time. And so as I was doing research for this episode, I came across two different cases where it was completely accidental plagiarism. There was the case of Sam Smith and Tom Petty, and Sam Smith's song Stay With Me had the exact same chord progression as Tom Petty's I Won't Back Down. So
yep. I can hear it. Like I'm listening. I can hear it in my head.
I know. Like you can totally hear it in your head. And Sam Smith swears he's never heard that song. However, like Tom Petty's song has been around for ages. It's played everywhere. So it's easy to get that in your subconscious mind. And another example I really loved is an example of the Rolling Stones. And Keith Richards was playing his new song, Has Anybody Seen My Baby? And he's playing it to his daughter. And his daughter's like grooving to it, and she starts singing lyrics, but they're not his lyrics. They're Katie Lang's Constant Craving lyrics.
Which is
and he's like,
song.
I know. And he's like, oh crap. We have a problem. And part of it was like his daughter played that song a lot. He never paid attention, but it got into his brain. And so he wrote the song with what he thought was like an original chord progression, but it sounded just like Constant Craving. And in each of these cases, it was easily resolved. All they did was say, hey, we're going to give you a writing credit on this. And when you get a writing credit, you get royalties. So Keith Richards called up Katie Lang and said, hey, I wrote this song. Here it is. Can we give you a writing credit? And she's like, yeah, sure. No problem. Easy.
Yeah, if only it was so easy. And I think what's really interesting is, and we'll link this up in the show notes, is there's so many examples of this from the music industry. And they talk about, there's an article we linked to that talks about Chuck Berry, how he's the most plagiarized artist ever.
Oh yeah, like the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, like everybody has plagiarized Chuck Berry. Poor guy.
You know, fascinating dynamics there in terms of power.
Oh, yes. I mean, the race dynamics there. And, you know, the Rolling Stones especially were so influenced by blues and jazz and early rock and roll from the Black community. So I can totally see how it happens. But, ooh, man, yeah, give credit where credit's due.
And, you know, here's the thing to remember in all of this. If regardless if it's unintentional or is intentional, it is a total problem, because someone taking credit for your ideas or portions of your body of work is a problem. It's something we're seeing in creative fields. We see it in business, but this idea of this copycatting, this plagiarized content is really a continuum. And I will say for some of you, this might seem like a gray area, because a lot of us have been conditioned over the years to think, oh, there's no new ideas, because that's something is very common in online business.
Oh my gosh, that message. There's no new ideas. Yes, ideas can have babies all of the time. Trust me, I know.
But there is no, new ideas. And then, so it starts to sound kind of normal. And that's because as an industry, online business is very much rooted in this culture of what's called robbing and duplicating. So there is a culture of plagiarism in this industry. We are just going to call it. You may have heard the term before, R&D as research and development. But in the broader business world, this is a very prevalent thing where R&D is called rob and duplicate or rip off and duplicate. And there's a great 2009 HBR Harvard Business Review article that discusses this type of R&D, which is basically the idea of taking a proven concept for another industry and using it to fuel innovation, which is something I know I've done. Michelle, I'm sure you've done that.
Oh yeah, my 3-word rebellion framework is partially fueled by social movement theory. So I totally see how I've used like research and thinking from that field in order to inform the work I do right now.
But here's the interesting part of this is, as this article explains, a routine idea in one industry can be a revolutionary one in another. But what are we not doing here, Michelle?
Well, I mean, we are not just copying. Like, I just didn't take social movement theory and pass it off as my own. I actually innovated a messaging system around it to help people create a 3-word rebellion. So I am not plagiarizing or copying. I'm still giving credit where credit's due. And I'm just creating something new from it, like being inspired from something outside of my industry and creating something new.
Yeah. And this is the exact thing, the reason we want to talk about this, because where's that line between innovating and something new? It's kind of what we were talking about in one of the previous episodes of the yes and. Like, are you yes-anding it or are you just copying it? Because so much of what we see in online business is straight up copying. Right through to plagiarism. And it's an entire industry of funnel hacking, fake it till you make it, and simply being one step ahead and stealing my system. So no wonder people think this is normal.
Well, yeah, because that is how it's sold to us, right? Like, oh, well, you just need to funnel hack. Take somebody's funnel you like and just copy it. No, don't do that. That probably won't work for you anyway, because it's not your work and how you do business. But that's what we're told to do. And just, swipe somebody's copy, because that's how you can write good copy. And sometimes then people just copy the copy.
Oh, yeah. The copying of the copy is a thing, which we'll talk about in a second. But we wanted to actually share a couple, tangible examples of this in action, which are either in the online business world or, like, I would say online business adjacent. Some of you might be familiar with this, how a company called With Honors, the irony here, copied a training from an influencer named Elise Dharma, and BuzzFeed wrote an article back in February 2021 on this. And it was a direct copy. Like, it was flat out plagiarism, no questions.
That's so harsh. I was first introduced to the whole rob and duplicate notion when I joined a women's networking group, and it's a fairly large nationwide networking group. And the leader came in and she literally just said, well, if you see something that you like, just rob and duplicate it. Why recreate the work? And I was like, well, that sounds like less work, but it also sounds like you're taking somebody else's property and using it. And then what was so interesting, the leader of the local group, I had a sales page and she was launching a new program. And then I went and looked at her sales page and wow, a lot of it was familiar to me. And some of it was directly the copy that I wrote for my program, even though my program was remarkably different than her program. But I'm still like, okay, these are my words and this is how I structured it. And oh dear, like, yeah, you did rob and duplicate. Okay. And then finally, another example where we saw this is, and the New York Times was just talking about this, the whole Rachel Hollis issue.
Her child were duped, apparently.
I know. She timed all of her follies just so well for Duped. But even before her recent spectacle, I guess I would call it. Like, she took an Maya Angelou quote, "And still I rise," and posted it to her social media like she came up with it. And that is a fucking famous quote. Like, everybody knew that Rachel Hollis didn't say it, but Maya Angelou did. And she rightfully got a lot of shit. And of course, she did what so many people do when they are caught plagiarizing. Well, it's my team's fault. Oh, I didn't realize that my team was posting that. It's still plagiarism, and you need to take ownership of that.
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts, and we're going to talk about some of these in the solutions period. Because as someone who literally does content for clients, like, our level of fact checking and systems around this are pretty robust. And it's because copycatting and full-on plagiarism is rampant in online business. I don't know what causes it, if it's how we're taught, maybe it's entitlement, maybe it's rooted in greater systems of oppression, or maybe it's the circles of indoctrination where people just teach the thing they just learned because that's very normal. It's like, I'm going to teach you the thing and you're going to teach the thing. Honestly, it's probably all of the above, but any way you slice it, this is an epidemic. And from our perspective, and this is one of the big reasons we wanted to do this episode, is it's resulted in a major lack of innovation as an industry. It's why there's so much sameness, because ideas that were once innovative are now considered common knowledge, and everyone thinks it's just the way things are done. So, Michelle, what's your take on what this is doing to us as an industry? Because I probably shouldn't talk about this, or I'll get like really agitated.
Well, I do think the lack of innovation is striking in our industry, and it has really led to this lack of customization. It's very much this one size fits all, cookie cutter. This is the blueprint. This is how you build a business. And the people who are facilitating some of these programs, if you come in with a different type of business model, or you're in a different industry, because, as Maggie talks about, there's business to business, there's business to consumer, there's business to entrepreneur. Some of these people with these cookie cutter programs can't actually give you customized advice or guidance on how to build your business, because they only know the one way, and they took that one way from somebody else. And so it's this it's like a self-perpetuating cycle where we're just getting more and more sameness. And don't even get me started on messaging and how that all sounds the same. I mean, as we talked about in episode 6 on the tired tropes, one of the reasons we all sound the same is because we're sharing the same type of message, and there's nothing creative about it. We haven't spent the time to actually think about how we want to say this in a unique way, or build our own unique framework that propels our thought leadership. So it's really harmful for our industry. It cuts innovation. I think it makes us less successful overall, because we're all trying to fit into these formulas that are too tight for us and don't quite fit. So it's just damaging. Oh, and then finally, sorry, I'm on a full-on tear. Well, I think it also leads to just people not being experts, right? And I know we've talked a lot about the difference between expert and influencer. It was our 3rd episode, but there is a real death of expertise when we're just taking other people's systems and robbing and duplicating them. Like, I could say, oh, you learned a great system from, I don't know, yoga, and you want to apply that to your business. That's a really cool thing. Do that. But that's not what we're seeing. And so people aren't actually becoming true experts in the things that they're selling. And that's a problem.
And you know what? Some of these things are so pervasive that, and I'm sure you have this experience, Michelle, I will encounter someone, I literally can tell you who taught them, who they've learned from.
Yeah,
because
me
I
too.
know that like I know all the systems, I know all the approaches, I know all the messaging, I know all the marketing tactics. It's so cookie cutter. And to your point on customization, before we talk about why do people copy, this is where I get clients for Small Business Boss, because people come to me and they're like, this just doesn't work for me. And I'm like, well, no kidding. It's so lacking any specificity. It's the most general, lackluster, cookie cutter, boring. Like, it's just not, it's bad. A lot of it's just terrible. Like, it deeply offends me from a business point of view.
Yeah, because and from a consumer perspective, I think of the people I know who gave people who they thought were experts their money and then got inside and it was this cookie cutter bullshit they've seen somewhere else and they realized that, hey, that's not going to work for me. So, yeah. It cost us as business owners our time, our energy, and our money. And really that's tragic. And it also, like, when we're investing in somebody else's program, and it's not a fit for what we want to create, it's taking us away from actually doing the work that will move the needle and build our businesses.
Yeah. So let's talk about why people copy, because I think the of broader context for this is really important, because we have all been involved in this industry. So we're not all showing up here, perfect. No one is perfect here, myself included, Michelle included. But a study published in the International Journal for Educational Integrity, yes, that's a thing, entitled "Why Do Postgraduate Students Commit Plagiarism?" provided some clues. And I thought this was really interesting because it looked at people who unintentionally and intentionally committed plagiarism. And the study cited pressure for good grades, laziness, and poor time management, as well as lack of good academic writing skills. And I thought those two were really interesting. So, Michelle, what's your take on how those stack up against business as the reasons why people copy?
Oh, I think they're very parallel, right? Because first off, I read this quote and it made me think of my student that I talked about. The only reason he plagiarized his paper is not because he wasn't smart enough, and he was actually a very good writer. It's just he didn't have time. He bit off more than he can chew. And I think an online business, especially if you are a solo business owner, or maybe you have one person on your team, you have to wear so many different hats. So there's like the hat of servicing your client, and the hat of selling, and the hat of marketing, and then the hat of content creation. And I heard something interesting from Tara McMullen on the What Works podcast, is how she views her job as a content creator. Like, pretty much that's her full-time job, is content creator. And so here we are putting on all of these hats, which means we don't have the time to create remarkable content. We don't have the time to really innovate our methodologies the way that we would like, because, we don't have the time to market the way we want. And so we have this lack of time management skills. And then if you add how you feel about writing on top of this, because I'm sure nobody told any of you that being an online business owner meant writing all the time. Whenever I talk to someone about the 3-word rebellion framework and they tell me like, oh, well, I really don't like writing, I'm like, well, you're going to have a problem owning a business, because that's all you're going to do. Like, when you are not working with clients, it is all writing. So if we don't trust our writing skills and think somebody said it better than we are, it's really tempting to plagiarize it.
And I love the fact that, it's really easy to look at someone else who's further along and think, oh, they said that well, they really expressed those ideas the way I want to. And Michelle, I know you and I have talked about this a ton, being in comms and around messaging, is sometimes it's going to take, we need to do the work to iterate, let it breathe. Like, it doesn't have to be perfect the first time. I mean, I've been writing my entire, I identify as a writer, as a content creator, and I don't always get it right the first time.
No, and that's actually okay. But I think we have this, we see somebody, I'm just going to put out Gary Vee, right? He produces like 9 million pieces of content a day. And we see him and we're like, oh, I need to like create that type of quality content. And meanwhile, he is pushing like, you got to have really great content. But he has a camera team following him around, a team of writers who writes up what he says and posts it on social media.
Like he has like a team of 20 that is like the content arm of Gary Vee.
Yeah. And we don't have that. Like we do not have the same access, but yet we put on ourselves like this level of perfection that if we don't get it right the first time, then it's a wash. And then when we're putting on that kind of pressure that we have to do it absolutely perfect, I can see why plagiarism looks like a really good option, because here's somebody else with a tested message and they're putting that message on the world and it's working for them. So it's like, oh, well, I could save so much time and get it right the first time. And that's not how messaging or communication works. It actually takes time to develop that unique message. And Maggie, I know for you, like you put so much time in trying to say what it is you do in a unique way. And I mean, I have too, but because
And you know what, part of this, I think what's been really interesting for me over the last year, and I really feel like this is important to bring up in the context of this episode, is I have had to really get specific. And I think that one of the things that I have been able to do, because I've got really specific about what I do talk about and what I don't talk about, is I can really put my energy, my research, everything into those very specific, kind of themes, if you will, because one of the things I see a ton of is this entire culture around expertise and invented authority in the online business world really contributes to this problem. When you are in the business of selling your expertise, and this is the trap we get into, it's easy to think you have to know everything about everything. So then you have all these broad content themes, all these buckets. And I believe as a content creator, as a comms person, as a marketer, as a business owner, this is a huge lie in this industry because people are so quickly out of their depth and they feel like admitting they don't know is weakness. For me, admitting I don't have to be an expert on everything has been the most freeing thing. And I'm creating some of the best content I've ever created as a result.
Yeah. And as a former professor, I had to stand in front of a classroom on multiple occasions and tell my students I didn't know because they would ask a really great question. And I'm like, wow, I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head. I was like, does anybody have any opinions on this? And I would always say, I don't know, but I'll find out and I'll get back to you.
That's exactly what I was taught to do in agency. Like a client would throw, like some CTO would throw like some remote thing. And I'd be like, I'd be like, listen, I'm not sure. Let me go find out.
Yeah. I mean, that was always and my students really appreciated it because it made it okay not to know something. So if I'm working with a client and they're asking me questions about LinkedIn, I'm like, ooh, I really don't know, but I have a great person for you to talk to. And that's okay. Like we don't have to know everything. And we should really stay in tune with our expertise.
Well, here's the thing. If you just stay in your own lane, you don't get into these troubles. When you focus on what you really and truly know, you are not in a position where you have to cobble together other people's ideas. And then guess what? Your work is actually more impactful because it's innovative, it's insightful. It's not just this sad cobbled together version of all these other people's things because you weren't, you had to try to be an expert on everything.
Yeah. And for me, I worked really hard creating the 3-word rebellion framework. And it's a very hard framework to rip off because you have to have a certain set of skills to actually do it well. But it's something that was so unique that I spent so much time creating and developing that if somebody else came out with like the 3-word revolution, I would probably get a phone call or a DM saying, hey, Michelle, you have a problem here. Because it's unmistakable to me and my business, but that took time.
And that's what's been fascinating. And I know you and I, like we promised on this podcast, things would be ripped out of the DMs. Want to talk about what's ripped out of the DMs? When people are forwarding me knockoffs of my work. And this happens more than once a week at this point.
Yeah, you get that more than I do, and I'm very grateful for that. But I know there's been a couple of times where I've had it happen where I'm like, oh, look, this is all of my analysis in this person's blog post that doesn't even mention me.
And here's the thing, I don't go looking for it. People bring it to me because they know it's my work. They're like, hey, Maggie. And it's not just my friends. It's people like that just know me from Instagram or my podcast, but they're like, I know I've heard you talking about this before. Yikes. Mm-hmm. We're going to talk about like the research methods and how you avoid this, but it's really important to remember in all of this, the culture of copying is a widespread issue far beyond our industry. From things like cultural appropriation to fashion designers knocking off other designers. Go follow the Diet Prada account on Instagram because they talk about this all the time. I am riveted by this. Forged speeches. Hello, Melania, copying Michelle's speech.
Oh, yeah. They had some issues in the last administration with plagiarism.
Yeah, they really did. Artwork and all, the things, just because this is like a thing that happens, it doesn't mean it's ethically acceptable.
Well, and remember, if you were in college, you could either get kicked out permanently, kicked out for a semester, fail the class, get an F on a paper. If you plagiarize, there were real consequences.
Yeah. And unfortunately, there are no consequences. And actually, Michelle, I think I would love to talk about the example you sent me yesterday, the Pepsi one.
Oh.
Or we kind of talk about research methods because it was such a large scale example. So Michelle and I were literally having a conversation around a lot of the narrative in online business is like just be more innovative. And sometimes just being more innovative is not going to be the thing that stops you from getting copied. As this example you're going to talk about is like, this blew my mind. We'll link it up in the show notes.
Yeah. So there is a functional soda that is woman owned, and I believe they're Asian, of Asian descent, and their soda is called Droplet, but that wasn't the original name. The original name was called Dewdrop until they got a cease and desist letter from Pepsi saying, hey, that's too confusing with Mountain Dew. They already had the patent or the trademark for that, the copyright for it, so it had been through the US government process to do that, and they said there was no brand confusion. So they were like, okay, that's fine. Well, we don't have the money to fight you for this. So they changed their name to Droplet. And then a few months later, somebody from PepsiCo ordered some of their product, which they refused to send. And then PepsiCo just released a new functional soda called Soul Boost. And the branding is almost the same. The messaging is almost the same. Social media is almost the same. Pepsi just pretty much ripped off this brand, and they don't have the money to fight Pepsi, and they can't innovate anymore. What they were doing was already pretty freaking innovative. So innovative, Pepsi was like, great, we'll just rip this all off because it's cheaper than buying you, apparently.
Yeah. And what we don't want to do is scare people, but what we do want to do is open people's eyes to the fact that this kumbaya, holding hands, let's just be innovative approach isn't necessarily going to be the answer if a PepsiCo wants to come for you.
Oh, yeah. Well, and I remember, I don't think Starbucks does this anymore, but Starbucks would partner with like a local bakery. Like they did a partnership here in Seattle with Top Pot Donuts. But what they would do is they'd put Top Pot Donuts in their stores until they figured out the recipe, and then they would kick them out of the partnership and then make the exact same donuts.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was a problem.
I'm glad I don't have a consumer good business because...
Oh, it's so easy to copy CPG.
So easy. So easy. I mean, I know this from the crafting world. Just a funny story. So I used to teach these card classes. This was like a artistic ripoff. And, so I would design cards for these things based on my own ideas. And I had a client who every single year, she's no longer with us, bless her soul, but she would take the card she made in my class and then enter it into our county fair and win first prize every year. For like 5 years running. I got to the point where I was like, I need to go to the Arts and Crafts Pavilion. I need to see my work winning first prize.
Oh my gosh. Oh, Jesus.
So apparently this is the whole thing with me. Apparently people like to copy, but we don't want you to be a copycat. So we want to talk about, how do you not do this? Like, you're probably thinking, like, you're probably stressed out right now listening to this going, oh my God, I don't want to be a copycat. So we're going to make this really specific so that you can take proactive steps. You're not doing this even unintentionally. And a lot of this, like I talked about a couple of minutes ago, comes down to research methods. We all arrive in this industry with different professional and academic backgrounds. So some of this might be stuff you already know, and some of this might be brand new. So there's a few really specific things we recommend. And then the number one thing I personally am going to recommend is that you slow down when you're creating content. In the rush to create that next Instagram post, blog post, podcast episode, it might be really easy to get sloppy and not cite your sources, or carefully consider if the idea is even yours.
Yeah. And I think this goes along with like using better research methods. Like, how are you keeping notes on your ideas and where you're reading things? Like, there's an app that I use because I read a lot of books on my Kindle, and there's this app called Readwise, and you can and it just basically imports all of your highlights.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing.
Oh yeah, it's amazing because it imports all of your highlights, so you can go back and review, which has been really great for doing research for this show. But it's a way for me to be like, okay, like, who said that? And I can actually like search on keywords until I find the quote that I'm looking for. So figuring out a process for taking notes and, hey, where did I hear this thing? Like, if you're not sure if it's an original idea or not. So yeah, create some type of system, whether it's Readwise or a Notion database or even a plain old like Excel spreadsheet or Google Doc, where you can keep a list of the articles that you often refer to.
And I do this in Notion. I use the Notion web clipper. I tag things. And I mean, people would probably be shocked at how much I save. Like, I am a digital resource hoarder, but you know what? When I go to write an article about MLM or cults or whatever, I know I can find my information easily and refer back to it. And to that end, source your data and stats carefully. This is something with every single one of my writers in the agency side. Like, this is in our standard operating procedures about fact checking your work, ensuring your stats aren't outdated. If I see one more thing with a stat that's like literally 5 years old, I'm going to scream really loud. Our rule of thumb is 2 to 3 years. That's pretty standard operating procedure. And finding the original source for the data. Don't just link to one of those janky articles that has like 20 stats about work from home. Like, find the original source, because if you can't track down the original source, it's probably outdated.
Yes. And another tip is to question if the ideas are actually yours, or did you hear them somewhere else? And MIT has a great article on what common knowledge is. And it's funny because I recently went through this, and I was DMing Maggie actually, because I wanted to talk about how messaging is the what, copywriting is the how, and marketing is like how you reach more people. And I could not find a source for this. I mean, it was talked on a million different websites, but I was like, who originally said this? And I spent an hour, could not track it down. And Maggie was just like, it's common knowledge. Just go ahead and use it. And I'm like, oh, yes.
What is and is not common knowledge, I think, is really important, because a lot of times we've heard an idea enough times that we start to think it's common knowledge, but this MIP article will actually help you kind of filter it a little bit better.
Yeah. So that's a great resource. But, if you're doing your due diligence and trying to find out where an idea comes from and you're not getting to the source, because most of the time it's actually super easy, barely an inconvenience, as my favorite YouTuber, Ryan George, would always say in Screen Rants, to find a source. Like, it usually just takes a couple of Google searches and you can find out who said what. But if you're down the rabbit hole, you're probably, straying into the common knowledge area.
There was an instance not that long ago where I knew something was not my idea and I could not find a source for it. And I Googled and I Googled and I Googled, and I'm a little pit bull terrier with the trying to get the answer. I couldn't find the source for it, so I didn't include it. because I knew it was not my idea. And I think this is where we have to have the discernment and the get okay with being like, hey, you know what? That would be a great addition, but it's not the right one for here.
Yes. Oh, and I just wanted to bring this up because this will sometimes happen, especially if you're doing podcast interviews. I was doing a podcast interview this morning and I was talking about a concept that I use, and I'm like, this is not my concept. I could not remember the guy's name for the life of me. And so I was just like, just so you know, this is not my idea. But this is what it is. Because sometimes when we're talking on the fly, we can't remember like the person who said the thing. And that's okay, but still just kind of distancing yourself and saying like, okay, this isn't my idea, but here's what it's all about.
Yeah. And I think if you're really struggling with this idea of like what to cite, what not to cite, Bowdoin College has some great guidelines on their website, which we've linked up. And, you know, I think the thing we want to leave you all with is citation may seem really time consuming. It might seem annoying. It might seem like we're being nitpicky. But here's what we want you to know. We're not asking you to create a detailed bibliography. This is not
not high school.
Yeah. Like my son hates that stuff. I hated it. Endnotes, footnotes, seventh circle of hell. I don't want to do that. But correctly citing people for their ideas means you do so in context, which means a link to the original source and a mention of where you learned the idea. No footnotes needed. It's literally that simple. Because the idea of this, what's called in-text citation, is designed to tell you the origin of an idea. This is the easiest and simplest way to ensure you're giving credit where credit is due. That's it.
Yeah, I mean, it's super conversational. It's like Maggie Patterson, who talks about celebrity entrepreneurs, said this. Like, that's all, just the link to that article, and you're done. I think, like, when we were in high school and college, we got really, like, wrapped up into, like, mine was the APA source citations, which was a pain in the ass. And so we think that's how it has to be when we're writing for the internet, and it doesn't. It's actually very simple to cite your sources.
And then there's one other really important aspect of this, which, Michelle, I really want you to take the lead on because I feel like you and I have talked about this a ton.
Yes. So the question of like, why is citation so critical? And I want to start in a slightly different area. Surprise, Maggie.
Shocking!
Shocking. But here's a way to think about citations. When you cite your sources, it actually makes you more credible. It doesn't take away from your work at all. Like, I was working with a client and she had probably 10 sources for her opt-in freebie, because what she does is very science-backed. And I was like, I love this. This is so persuasive to me to see the argument outlined with like research. That's so exciting. So don't think it lessens your ideas or your thoughts because you're citing sources. It's just showing like you're credible. You know your stuff. You're actually an expert. Furthermore, feminist writer Sarah Ahmed in her book, Living a Feminist Life, talks about her approach to citation. And I love this, by the way. Citation is feminist memory. Citation is how we acknowledge our debt to those who came before, those who helped us find our way when the way was obscured, because we deviated from the paths we were told to follow. And that is a beautiful reason.
I mean, if that's not a compelling enough reason, I don't know what is. But finally, you know, here's the thing. You should cite your sources because, as I always like to talk about, it's about trust. People are going to trust you if you are rigorous and intentional about your citation versus just sloppy and pretending it's all your idea.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Yes. Like, you don't have to pretend that it's all your idea.
Michelle and I debated whether to include personal examples in this. It would be a very long episode if we included examples of times we've been things, particularly me lately. And, you know, I don't want anyone to feel bad if they've done this. I want you to just do better. Ultimately, that's what I want. We're doing this because we want to open up the conversation, because we are so scared in this industry to have a conversation, to admit we don't know something, to literally be like, hey, this isn't my idea, but I'm going to riff on this idea anyways. Like, if we could just do that, oh my gosh, life would be so much better for all of us.
And it goes back to the story of the student I told. What happened to him afterward is, yes, he got suspended from a semester. It delayed his graduation, but he rebuilt his relationship with his professors and they let him into the graduate program after the plagiarism. So it is really about saying like, oh, I did this thing. I can make it right and learn from it and do better and move on. Because some of this stuff is accidental. Some of it is absolutely intentional, but we can take ownership of how we screwed it up, much like the Rolling Stones or Sam Smith, and move forward.
I just want the royalties on Celebrity Entrepreneur, Michelle.
You need to turn it into a song.
Oh, I'm a good writer, but songwriting, I don't think that's a good way. I don't think that's a good direction for me.
Love it. I want to see it, though. It would be epic.
It might be better as an interpretive dance on Reels.
Oh, no, please.
So with that, we're going to talk about shit we saw on the internet this week. Michelle, what did you see on the internet?
Yeah, apparently everyone is getting the same DM about being one of the top 10 coaches for Yahoo Finance or top 10 branding people, like
Mine's
whatever
marketing.
they're talking.
Online marketing was mine.
Oh, yours is online marketing. I think mine was coaching, I want to say, or maybe it was a consultant. I've gotten multiple of these messages, but it's like, hey, we would love to include you in our article about the top 10 or whatever, insert your title here, that will be in Yahoo Finance. Let me know if you're interested and we'll see if you qualify. P.S. There's a charge for this.
$495. That's how much mine was.
Oh, yeah. See, most of mine don't have prices. It just says, oh, there's a charge. A charge is applicable. I think they end it with. And I'm like, oh God, this is like just buying credibility, buying publicity so that you can say like, oh yeah, I was in Yahoo Finance. Yeah, you paid to be in Yahoo Finance.
This is why the XPR person is always suspect of certain logos. That one, ABC, there's a few others, Fox, because
Yes.
you can put a press release on the wire and get those things. Like it's not actual media coverage. This is what I call the as seen on press hack. It drives me wild as a former recovered PR person. It is so wrong. So if anyone is telling you they've been in Yahoo, like that's not credible.
No, they paid to be there. Yeah. Or they put a PR release out on the wire and all of a sudden they're on Fox and ABC and CBS and all the rest of them. And it's all just like fake credibility, fake authority, because we're always told as entrepreneurs, and like Maggie and I both have as seen on somewhere on our websites. And I mean, yeah, like I got those placements. Like I pitched to Fast Company and got an article accepted. Someone else wrote about me for Inc. Like I didn't even do that. I was just there in it. Somebody quoted me and I was like, oh, that's super cool. And I didn't pay for any of those. I actually earned that media coverage. So when we like the whole pay to play just to prove you're credible, like those lists are incredibly unmeaningful. And if you see somebody who's in a top 10 list and you're wondering like, why am I not one of the top 10 coaches? You could be for a price. So it says nothing about you or the quality of your work.
Not to mention, like, can we just talk about Yahoo? Is it $19.99?
Yes,
the first time I got this, I was like, Yahoo's still alive? What?
I know. They publish articles. Like, who the hell's seeing that?
Am I going to email you from my AOL account? Do you want to send me an AIM messenger? Hey, better yet, an ICQ?
Oh my God.
Like, that's the way that feels. Like, oh my gosh, no. No. All right. So mine is a major no. Okay. Someone sent me this article and it cracked me up because it's actually a Facebook ad. It was right below me in the feed where I was talking about from episode 6, the 7-figure business. Like, why are we having this conversation? So the ad right below me in the feed is $65,000 in 2 months, the done for you agency. Whoa. Yes. Do I think you can make $65,000 in 2 months with the right agency? Absolutely. But I really have a problem. Michelle knows where I'm going with this because we just talked about this. I really have a problem with the way the agency model is treated as the only and the most desirable way to scale a service business. An agency is a totally different business model, and we need to acknowledge that. The way you operate an agency is not just a fancy service business. It requires a lot more infrastructure, a lot more tracking of different metrics, a lot more attention to client service because you're not necessarily going to be the one doing it. So the agency conversation, every time I see these ads, makes my blood boil and my skin crawl because now you're going, I can make $32,000 a month. Well, but you're not actually going to make $32,000 a month. You're going to have a significant overhead. Just saying.
Yeah. Gosh, those too good to be true Facebook ads.
Also, $65,000 in 2 months is the most random. And this guy looks like he's 10. And a lot of these agencies, can I just say, what their game is, they charge $10,000 or $20,000 a month for garbage, and then they outsource it to people that they pay $3 an hour. It's so messed up.
Yeah, and that does not bode well for the quality of the work.
No, it really, truly does not. So with that, those are things we've seen on the gram. We don't know where we're going to go next week, but we are coming back next week, right, Michelle?
Yes, we have one more episode of this limited series podcast, and it's going to be more of a reflective one and looking at the harm that this has done to the industry as a whole, but also to individual business owners. And the harm goes beyond just lost time, money, and energy. It's so much deeper than that. And that is, for us, the best way to wrap up this season of Duped.
So with that, thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed today's episode, rate or review the podcast, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen. Unless you hated this podcast, in which case, why are you still listening?
Yeah, this is a real commitment for you to still be listening. Don't listen, just unsubscribe.
It's episode 8. If you do not like it, what are you doing?
Exactly.
All right, well, thank you so much for listening, and we'll be back next week with a fresh new episode. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate or review us on Apple Podcasts so more people can find the show.
To learn more about Duped, you can check out our website at duped.online for show notes and more details about your hosts.